Greetings, ladies and gentlemen, it is I am the one and only Joy here, and once again I am back for the likes of the Mexi Toys videos. And ladies and gentlemen, welcome back for some more of Let's Play of Super Princess Peach for the Nintendo DS. So, last time, we somehow managed able to fully complete every single aspect in terms of the final world in the game, which obviously takes place in Bowser's Villa, to grab the last couple of those puzzle pieces, in addition to the last few music score boxes. In addition to that, we also managed able to unlock the final levels for 3 minigames for Toad Jump, Toad Trot, and Toad Shot, which means about the fact that we somehow able to actually now access to level 10 of those 3 minigames. So logically though, everything else is all pretty much done, right? Well, it turns out, if you couldn't tell already, is about the fact that today for this video is that we are about to be going back into the actual main save file right here, because otherwise though, we are now tackling through some extra stuff. So because of this though, after all these stages have been fully completed now, and in addition to try to take on the final boss for the second time, so logically though, is about the fact that everything else is done. Well, now we're done with the forms of the main parts, now let's get into the extra stuff like I said before. So to begin things off, is about the fact that as you can see, that if you press the L button, that allows us able to actually access to the menu selection, where basically though you're able to actually select up to 5 different modes to able to check out. Like for instance though, there's the mini game, and in addition to puzzle, and music room, and bonus, as well as the forms of glossary, book enemy kind of menu, which either way though, yeah, we'll try to show off the other modes for later, just because as you can tell from the actual description of the video, is that first things first though, is that we need to go into the puzzle mode first, because logically though is about the fact that when you start the game off, when you begin your adventure I should say, the first other sort of collectibles you might encounter, and that's of course puzzle pieces, right? Well, it turns out, as you can see on screen, that we somehow managed able to actually unlock not only the first 4 puzzle stages, but in addition to the other 4 on the other side. So because of that, because relatively speaking though, on the first 4 puzzle stages, that you do need to collect about a maximum of 12 puzzle pieces during your first run through, or in some cases on the forms of this whole entire process, which means about the fact that the first 4 stages are pretty self-explanatory, whilst compared to the forms of how it does on the other half, that basically though we need to collect about 24 puzzles each. So because of that, yeah, as you can tell, those puzzle stages are actually based off from several worlds that you somehow experienced before. Like, for example, on the first puzzle stage, this is obviously inspired by the first world, and then as soon as we get onto the forms of the second stage, that obviously takes place in Journey forms of in World 2, and etc, etc. So because of that, yeah, as you can tell, in order to able to actually rotate the puzzle pieces around, is that not only do you have to hold the puzzle piece down, but also you have to press either L button or R button respectively, so you can able to rotate the puzzle piece around. And then as soon as you're able to completely done with the forms of that puzzle, well, you can basically move on to the next one. So either way, and straight to the point, depending on what stage you go into, you can able to actually listen to a different music in the background, such as for instance though, that we did somehow manage able to hear the first rendition of the puzzle music on the first stage, and now we're on to the second stage, where basically the music sounds a little bit different right here, very similar to the forms of how it does it on the actual stages themselves, and in addition to other games as well, they do manage to have different music depending on what act you go into, like, you know, Sonic the Hedgehog 3 and Knuckles, and in addition to Sonic and Knuckles especially, and in addition to that, Sonic Mania, and also Sonic Superstars, at least as far as I do notice anyway, and in addition to other stuff here and there as well. So, yeah, for the most part though, there's no penalties if you do manage to able to mess this up beyond belief, so time really does not matter, as long as you were able to just trying to complete them, basically. So either way, so as you can tell, I really do love the actual illustrations, if you couldn't tell already, despite the fact that several of Peach's illustrations were actually based off from, you know, the touchscreen portion of certain aspects. Like, for instance, though, with the forms of this particular stage right here, obviously inspired by Wall 3, and as you can tell for the fact that it does manage able to reuse the exact same Peach each illustration based off of the likes of the forms of something is about to be up ahead. Like, for instance, though, trying to find these specific items, like, you know, puzzle pieces, or toads, or anything else like that. Yeah, you can get the idea what I was expecting to be able to point things out. So, anyway, so yeah, a few things I want to talk about this is, though, and that's what appears to be for the fact that, well, today's date, of course, there is the 4th of June today, in some cases in 2025 today, and as you can tell, tomorrow, Nintendo Switch 2 is releasing, and in addition to Mario Kart World as well. So yeah, we are getting very close to the actual hype of the, you know, both of those things combined. And no matter what though, still, I fully appreciate about the fact that we are, you know, now finally approaching on to the next era for the likes of the actual Nintendo family of systems. So as a result, still, I'm really looking forward to able to actually trying out, you know, the Nintendo Switch 2 in addition to Mario Kart World. So relatively speaking, I was about the fact that I'm sure a lot of players out there will say the same thing, despite the fact that the price tag is pretty ridiculous. Enduring forms within some regions, which you probably already expect at this point, so either way. And in addition to that, I also did somehow found out that later on tonight, during the Evolves event in the UK time within 10 o'clock. Obviously though, there's going to be yet another State of Play direct made by PlayStation, which means about the fact that this might actually be the beginning in terms of the Evolves of more gaming announcements. So because of that though, yeah, I'm afraid to tell you, I don't think I can probably mention about this during the Evolves event today, but maybe until tomorrow, or perhaps even maybe if Lola Bunny were able to actually mention more about it, if she decides to able to go back on playing through Pony Cards DS at some point during the likes event this coming weekend. So generally speaking, that was about the fact that we shall wait and see what happens in due time. So, I digress. So, yeah, as you can see, for the fact that as soon as we move on to the 5th stage right there, as you can tell, there are some more puzzle pieces we now need to fill in, because like I said before, we are now going to be approaching on to 24 pieces for the final 4 stages in puzzle mode. So, yeah, for the most part, it's self-explanatory, so there's nothing right to harm about. I mean, obviously, though, you have to complete them in order able to actually get something out of it, once we do able to actually taking care of the forms of some other stuff, you know? Which again, we'll discuss more about that, probably for some other time, so either way. Now, there's also another thing else I would like to explain to you all, is about the fact that, well, relatively speaking now, is about the fact that recently though, that Nintendo Music app has recently added yet another The Legend of Zelda game onto the actual playlist, and this time what appears to be The Legend of Zelda Tears of the Kingdom. So no matter what though, in addition to now having ourselves both The Legend of Zelda Breath of the Wild, but in addition to Tears of the Kingdom in that particular Nintendo Music app right now. So no matter what though, it's about the fact I'm quite pleasantly pleased about that, especially considering about the fact that both of those games in particular is also going to be releasing on Nintendo Switch 2, as in Nintendo Switch 2 editions, mind you, until at some point until tomorrow as well. So generally speaking, I was about the fact that everything else will become to expect for the actual hypeness and everything, so you can get the idea for that. So, but anyway, there's also another thing else I'd like to explain to you all for something, and that's what appears to be for the fact that, well, apparently though, Pokemon Scarlet and Violet has also received yet another version update, and this time what appears to be version 4.0.0, and they only addressed 2 things, which appears to be visuals optimized for the Nintendo Switch 2, display, and high-resolution TVs for improved image quality. In addition to that, of course, frame rate will be improved for smoother movement on Nintendo Switch 2 specifically, because, you know, Nintendo Switch 2 is considerably much more powerful than the evolves of how it does it for the Switch 1. And speaking of Switch 1 though, kind of think about it, that out of nowhere, ever since in around 2 days ago, though I suppose I forgot to mention about this potentially, that out of nowhere, that Nintendo Switch 1 has already managed able to get ourselves yet another system update, which appears to be now on to version 20.1.1. Although it doesn't feel too surprising, especially considering about the fact that there might be some potentials about the fact that there's going to be some games will not start due to uploading or something like that. Although mind you, it hasn't exactly got that much description for the sake of the actual specific update in mind, because obviously though, not too while ago that we've already got ourselves, you know, version 20.1.0 not too while ago, but now that we somehow got yet another update out of nowhere. So, oh well, no big deal. So anyways, the next thing I want to address something, and that's what appears to be for the fact that someone did somehow say that it may be a possibility for the sake of the phones of this upcoming Xbox Games Showcase Direct at some point on Sunday. Maybe there might be a possibility there's going to be yet another rumor is going to be happening. That's what appears to be a new Spyro game will be rumored for a while, and straight to the point, it might actually be about time to able to actually finally get a chance to see Spyro 4 into reality. Well, again, we'll have to wait and see what happens in due time though, especially it's probably best if we let Maxie or Lola Bunny will mention more about it during at some point for the next couple of days' time, especially considering for the fact that, you know, like I said before about the fact that first things first though, we have to go through the state of play first before we dive into the forms of some exciting stuff. So anyway, and it's also worth reassuring about the fact that with the upcoming state of play, during the forms of it tonight, or depending on what time zone you lived in, like for instance though, about the fact I believe in America, you're able to experience that particular direct on the afternoon or something like that. So relatively speaking of, what I've also realized is that the actual direct itself for State of Play is going to be lasted for about 40 minutes. So I'm very curious to know of what specific announcements they'll bring for State of Play. But then again though, it's probably best if we let Lola Bunny, we're able to mention more about it if, you know, she goes back on playing through Pony Card DS. So, oh, and on top of all that stuff though, speaking of cards though, did you guys know about the fact that also, from out of nowhere, there's a sequel to that particular game called Garfield Kart? Yeah, you guys remember that game? I sure don't, because obviously though, I just couldn't be bothered able to get that game to begin with, but that's besides the point. So, yeah, there's apparently a sequel to Garfield Kart called Garfield Kart 2, Or You Can Drift, which, as a result, it is indeed going to be confirmed to be released on Nintendo Switch for sure, and possibly other platforms as well. So, logically though, is about the fact that it's going to be coming during at some point in September for some time, which I can't really tell exactly when exactly, but I'm sure enough that was about the fact you guys should probably already know what I'm talking about for the sake of time. So anyway, so now let's get into the final stage in terms of the puzzle mode, and that's going to take place in Bowser's Villa, which instead of showing us Princess Peach, so instead it's been replaced by 3 different Goombas with 3 different emotions, like, you know, one from gloom, one from anger, and then the other one for joy, so no calm apparently. So anyway, it is also reassuring about this too, that there's going to be a, let's just say, the game is going to be revealed for the sake of the forms of the project 007 at some point, which I'm pretty sure about the fact that it's going to be most likely going to be taking place on Bond's origin story, which I know it's kind of hard to say this right about now, but I'm sure enough that we'll hear more about that during at some point once we make our way to presumably by the end of this week, or potentially until next week, depending on the forms of the actual companies is actually going to be working on, you know, the different presentations, you know? Oh, in addition to that, we got ourselves some even more Nintendo Switch games will be updated for Nintendo Switch 2 compatibility. And luckily, there's that one particular compilation game that's thankfully going to be compatible with Nintendo Switch 2, which I'll discuss more about that in a second. So either way, so we already know for a fact that on the launch day that obviously that we're able to experience 12 selections of Nintendo Switch games will receive the actual version update already, but what I've noticed, they're also going to be added in more. So, for instance though, is about the fact that let's get things started with the forms of the alphabetical order. In terms of the forms of some Switch 1 games will be fully compatible with Nintendo Switch 2. Such as, for instance, with ARMS is going to be receiving version 5.5.1, and that usually came out during the forms of yesterday. And obviously though, there's no point for able to mention about the forms of the general effects, because we've already technically mentioned about this ever since in during the forms of around a couple of days back. So either way, I'm only going to be mentioning about the forms of some Switch 1 games will be receiving the actual specific numbers of the actual version updates. So, that's essentially how I roll. So, next up we have is Big Brain Academy, Brain vs. Brain. That particular game will receive version 1.2.0 as the forms of in yesterday. And also in yesterday, that Captain Toad's Treasure Tracker, the Switch version only, that's what appears to be for the fact that that game is going to be on version 1.4.0 as the forms of yesterday, like I said before. And next up we have is Clubhouse Games 51 Worldwide Classics. That particular game is also on, let's just say at this point in time, is currently now onto version 2.0.0, which, either way, that's sure it's something. So, now before we mention more about the forms of other games in particular, speaking of games though, here we go onto the mini-games now. So as you can see, there's only like 3 mini-games total. Now, originally though, I was originally able to actually show you guys Toad's Jump at first, but I actually did manage to able to discover something right from the start though, and that's what it appears to be for the fact. Unfortunately though, we've come across into a technical issues right off the bat, as the moment I did manage to able to practice the Toad's Jump on my spare own time, on the actual recording session, mind you, the microphone never picks up, which means about the fact that I do need to fix it somehow. So instead of trying to go into Toad's Jump straight away, so instead, as you can see, we are going to be experiencing Toad Trot at first, because obviously though, that thankfully though, 2 of those minigames in particular does only requires you to use the stylus, whilst compared to the forms of how it does on Toad's Jump, you have to require a microphone in order to be able to play the actual thing. So as I said before, there are only 10 levels in total, so in order to be able to go for 400% completion, you have to complete every single stages in these mini-games. So, and for the most part, once you do manage to complete the mini-game, depending on what level you do somehow complete, obviously though you get yourself some plentiful of coins. Well, usually when you complete level 1, you're able to actually get about 10 coins, and then when you complete level 2, you're able to get 20, and vice versa, depending on what levels you go into. So, for the most part, this will be a great way for you if you really want able to grind for some more coins, but honestly, that we've already purchased everything at this point when it comes to shops and all that. So, yeah, for the most part, though, it's about the fact that for this particular Toad Trot mini game right there, your goal is pretty simple. Basically, though, you have to guide Toad into, let's just say like a fiery maze labyrinth layout, and it's your job to able to guide Toad into the actual goal. However, if you dare touch the forms of the fire, either the fire bars or flamethrowers, and especially noticeable in the later stages, they'll able to actually add in a different obstacle, which means that if you dare touch something hazardous, well, you have to start all over. So because of that though, if you get hit once, you have to try again. So either way. But for the most part though, that as you can see on the actual bottom screen right there, there's also a time limit too. So you have to be, well, kind of fast about it. So because of that though, and it's also reassuring about this too, thankfully the time limit is very generous to you. Especially, it always starts off as in exactly 99 seconds, so you still got plenty of time, as long as you don't waste your time, because again, if you let your time run out, then you have to start all over as well. So either way, chances are though, for the most part, this minigame is like very self-explanatory if you pretty much know what to do. So either way, and sometimes though, depending on what levels you go into, like for instance though, I believe the first 4 levels, that's usually for the sake of the forms of Toad's Trot anyway, that the actual fire color was basically all in red. So eventually at some point in level 5 all the way up to level 7, the flames were able to actually go into a different color. And same applies with the forms of level 8 all the way up to level 10. So yeah, as you can see, on level 4, that we now have to avoid that particular spike ball. So because of that, sometimes it can be unpredictable at times with all that particular, not only for its patterns, but in addition to that though, the hitbox itself as well. So most of the time though, is about the fact you need to be so precise with your stylus movements, with your hand and everything. So, but anyway, let's get back into the forms of some Switch 1 games will be fully compatible with Nintendo Switch 2 things. So, next up we have is Game Builder Garage. That particular game was going to be on version 1.1.0 as the forms have been yesterday. And in addition to that, yet another new game will be added to the forms of this compatibility with Nintendo Switch 2. And there's going to be quite a lot around here. So, anyway, Kirby's Dream Buffet is going to be on version 1.0.0a. I have no idea why they say A on here, but that's besides the point. So, as far as I'm aware, that it also happened in yesterday, and straight to the point, they only addressed one thing, and that's what it appears to be. Several adjustments have been made to improve gameplay on Nintendo Switch 2. So, yeah, I guess that makes it pretty obvious, kind of think about it. And the next game we have here is Kirby Star Allies. So as a result, that game is going to be on version 4.0.0a. Again, similar to the defaults of how it does it for Kirby Stream Buffet. So I digress. And I'm pretty sure the actual description remains the same. Like several adjustments have been made to improve the gameplay on Nintendo Switch 2. So that also happened yesterday. And meanwhile, we've also have The Legend of Zelda Breath of the Wild. That game is going to be on version 1.8.0 as the forms have been yesterday, and straight to the point, they've also added in some couple of things here and there, such as for instance though, as to be expected, several issues have been addressed to improve the gameplay experience. In addition to that, adding support for the Nintendo Switch 2 edition, and also they somehow added support for the Portuguese or Brazil system language setting. And speaking of Portuguese, because Portuguese is not a supported voice language, and if you somehow select the match system settings option in the game, the voice content will be used in English still. So because of that, though, I'm afraid to tell you there's not going to be any multi-language selection for the sake of defaults of the compilation anyway. So, bit of unfortunate, I know. But anyway, and next up we have is The Legend of Zelda Tears of the Kingdom, which I believe that game is going to be on version 1.4.0. And no matter what though, they also added support for the Nintendo Switch 2 edition. And also, much like Breath of the Wild, they're going to be added support for the Portuguese Brazilian system language setting. And in addition to that, I'm pretty sure that because in Portuguese is not a supported voice language, the voice content will use the language you select in the in-game options. So, and they also added the amiibo support for specifically 4 of those amiibos that ties into the forms of Tears of the Kingdom story, like for instance those Sidon and Tillen, Yodobo and Reggie amiibos. So, and of course, several other issues have been addressed to improve the gameplay experience. So, yeah, I guess it's that. So anyway, next up we have is The Legend of Zelda Link's Awakening Remake. That particular game is going to be on version 1.1.0 as the forms of yesterday. So as per expected, nothing else can really add around here. And meanwhile, for The Legend of Zelda Echoes of Wisdom, that game is going to be on version 1.1.0, much like the forms of how it does it for Link's Awakening Remake, for sure. But then, unexpectedly, that particular compilation game, as I mentioned this earlier, well, apparently though, Super Mario 3D All-Stars is now officially compatible with Nintendo Switch 2, surprisingly enough. And as a matter of fact, that particular game will be on version 1.1.2 as the forms of yesterday. And much like the forms of how it does on the other Kirby games for sure, they've only addressed one thing, and that is of course, several adjustments have been made to improve gameplay on Nintendo Switch 2. And next up we have is Super Mario 3D World plus Bowser's Fury. That particular game is going to be on version 1.2.0. So no matter what though, nothing else can really say about it. And Super Mario Odyssey is going to be on version 1.4.0. And Super Mario Bros. Wonder is also getting its new update as well. That's of course version 1.0.2. And the actual description remains the same as the previous 3 games have recently been added to the actual list. Like, you know, several adjustments have been made to improve gameplay on Nintendo Switch 2. And meanwhile, for New Super Mario Bros. U Deluxe is going to be on version 1.0.2. And in addition to that, Pikmin 3 Deluxe is now going to be supported, and as a result, it's going to be on version 1.1.2. So, they somehow addressed 2 things here and there, like for instance though, particularly cultivating an issue that occurs when playing on Nintendo Switch 2, where the entire screen flickers during some scenes in the game, such as when a day starts and ends. Oh gee, it's gonna be one of those technical graphical glitches here and there if you don't manage to able to update the actual thing in time. So yeah, I guess that makes it pretty obvious they were trying to fix that. So And they also address we will be releasing an update in a near future to fix this completely. So yeah, I guess that's all there is to it. So, and like I mentioned this before, that Pokemon Scarlet and Violet is going to be expecting to have version 4.0.0, and finally, Xenoblade Chronicles 3 is going to be on version 2.2.1. So, yeah, and no matter what though, I don't get the feeling about the forms of that particular description I did somehow found out. But regardless of such though, as you can tell, that we've already experienced level 5 all the way up to level 7 in Toad Tote Shot. That, as you can tell, the flame colors was actually in purple, whilst on level 8 all the way up to level 10, if you couldn't tell, that the flame color or the fire color was now in light blue. So, and this is where the difficulty is about to ramp up significantly, specifically not only level 8, but also with level 9 and level 10 respectively, just because, well, obviously that is about the fact, if you couldn't tell, a lot more obstacles is going to be much more common. So yeah, for the most part though, it's just about the fact you have to take it slow and all that stuff, because, you know, slowly and steady wins the race kind of syndrome or something like that. Well, I honestly have no words able to actually describe about this particular subject for that matter. But regardless of such though, it's about the fact that still, we are getting very close to that particular Switch 2 is finally became reality. So, that's pretty awesome to me. So, anyway, and it's also reassuring about this too, is about the fact that for those of you who lived in the forms of that particular country, or to be more accurate though, there was this particular thing on Felpalines. Basically, there was actually this rumored game that has officially became true. That's what appears to be called Sonic Blitz, which, for those of you who don't know what that game is about, basically it feels remarkably similar to, well, let's just say, Marvel Snap, where basically, though, you're able to actually have a stack of cards, but this time around, though, with Sonic the Hedgehog theme. So basically, what this means, though, is about the fact that you can able to do some sort of like a turn-based RPG or something like that. I mean, it's a bit hard for me to describe about anything else about the forms of Sonic Blaze at this point, just because no matter what, though, it only came out in one country at the moment. So because of that, though, yeah, I was able to actually try to consider that, for able to try that game out at some point once it comes out on, well, any other countries for that matter, but then again, time will definitely tell for this point, so either way. So as you can tell, we're now onto the final level in Toad Tote Shot, and this is where things get a lot more insanely difficult, mainly with this last part right there with this fast spinning fire bar, but luckily I did manage to get my fast reaction timing, and there we go, Toad Shot is fully completed. So yeah, there's one minigame down, and only 2 more to go. So next up we'll try to show off is Toad Shot, which that particular minigame also utilizes the stylus controls, so thankfully there's no microphone required, unlike Toad Jump, which, suffice to say, again, I will try to fix that at some point, once we do manage to before we try to able to conclude this game for reals. So, anyway, so let's get on to Toad Shot then. So basically, in this minigame right here, you have to reach a certain amount of points in order to actually move on to the next level or something like that, or essentially complete the stage. So, now as you can see on screen, that we have to hit only the Bowser's enemies, such as for instance though, if you hit a Goomba, you're able to get 1 point, and then if it's a Koopa target, you're able to get 3, and then the Hammer Bro target only gives you 5, and then the biggest one out of them all though is Bowser, which if you hit him for about 3 times consecutively, obviously though you were able to get 10 points. But there's also the Bob-omb, which actually causes the explosion range, so that way it'll be a recommendable addition, which I'll explain more about that in a second, once we're able to get into, you know, the later stages. So either way, and you have to avoid the Mario targets and the Luigi targets, because otherwise if you accidentally hit those targets, you lose points. So, but then you also keep that in mind. If you dare touch the actual touchscreen without even directly hitting the actual other targets, you also lose points. So, like for instance though, if I was desperately trying to able to beat the Bowser's target right there, basically though, that actually wasted a couple of my points. So, you have to time this perfectly until you're able to actually hit these targets. So, and also I do really love the forms of that particular reference from Rainbow Ride right there in the background, because as you can tell, that obviously though, depending on what levels you go into, like let's just say in level 1, and level 4, and level 7, and level 10, I'm pretty sure it's only gonna take place in a grassy land, So, enduring forms have been level 2, level 5, and in addition to level 8, I think it's what it says. Basically though, it does manage to take place on a familiar environment from the likes of in Rainbow Ride. Not only for the likes of in Super Mario 64, but more accurate though, based off of the background from the likes of in Super Smash Bros. Melee from the actual stage. So yeah, that's actually kind of interesting. So, and finally, most notably though, in level 3 and level 6 and level 9, basically though, it does manage to take place on the inside of the castle. So because of that though, yeah, you can get the idea for this point. So either way, and if you do manage to let the time run out, then obviously though, you have to restart the entire minigame again. So yeah, that's something worth noting for. So anyway, so I suppose there's also the next thing I want to discuss upon, actually though, and that's what it appears to be for the fact that, well, apparently though, speaking of The Legend of Zelda actually, that we're about to be expecting to get The Legend of Zelda chess set, which does manage to contain, obviously the checkerboard, as be expected when it comes to likely for, you know, chessboard games, you obviously do come with it. But in addition to that, you also managed able to get yourselves about 16 hero gold chess pieces, in addition to 16 villain black chess pieces, which obviously makes a grand total of like, you know, 32 pieces you're able to actually get. So, for instance though, on the hero gold chess pieces, you're able to actually get the king, which obviously stands for Link, and queen for Zelda, and in addition to 2 bishops for the sake of the Falls of Impa, and 2 knights are for Epona, the horse companion from the likes of The Legend of Zelda Ocarina of Time, all the way up to the Tears of the Kingdom basically. And in addition to that, 2 rogues for the sake of the forms of Dorona, I think it's what it says anyway, and also 8 pawns for the sake of the forms of Navi, the fairy companion for Link. So, and as far as the forms of the villain black chess pieces are concerned, well, we obviously do have Ganondorf as the king and queen for the sake of the forms of Twin Rufa from the likes of The Legend of Zelda Ocarina of Time, and also 2 bishops for the likes of Iron Knuckle, and 2 knights for Phantom, and 2 rogues for the likes of the forms of Amos, and finally 8 pawns for the sake of the forms of Duko Scrubs, or Deku Scrub. So yeah, that's as far as I was able to try to describe about that actually. So anyway, but I don't know exactly what the release date is going to be confirmed exactly, but I'm very curious to check it out though, especially considering for the fact I do already know how to play chess or something like that. I mean, mind you, it has been quite some time since I actually have last played chess before on one hand, just because, you know. Still, I'm incredibly excited for able to check out the Nintendo Switch 2, as we expect at this point. So, chances are though is about the fact I bet a lot of players out there is going to be hyped about it, like I said before. So, either way. So yeah, so far so good in terms of the forms those minigame performances, as far as you can definitely tell. Especially we're now on to the, well, the halfway point, potentially speaking of, for Toad Shot. So, there's also reassuring about this too. We also on to the halfway point in terms of the minigames category before we move on to the last batch of stuff of how this game actually has to offer. So, but then again though, if you really want to go after the forms of the final item in the game, which appears to be called, there's this thing called Endless 5, where basically though, it's probably best if we're able to discuss more about it, probably presumably by tomorrow, or perhaps even maybe on Sunday or Saturday, depending on the forms of the current situation with the actual, well, technical issues here and there, but I digress. So, I suppose there's technically the next couple of things I want to describe about, and that's what appears to be for the fact that I'm pretty sure that in Sonic Racing Cross Worlds, might have exactly the similar control scheme as the forms of how it does it for Team Sonic Racing, although there's also the Legacy control scheme option will be available, much like the forms of how it does it in, well, Sonic X Shadow Generations back in 2024, so relatively speaking though, I might able to actually give that Legacy option a chance, to able to actually see if I prefer that control scheme once we're able to dive into the actual Let's Play of Sonic Racing Cross Worlds until presumably by next year, so just in case about the fact that way it'll give us some plenty of time to able to actually try out the game for ourselves, and in addition to that though, just trying to think about, well, you know, other Let's Plays to tackle first. So, anyway though, now I suppose there's technically the final thing I want to discuss upon, and that's what it appears to be for the fact that, well, conveniently enough, For the sake of the forms of Disney Channel Animation YouTube channel, they did somehow publish the video called Celebrating 40 Years of Voices on Disney Channel, so yeah, I guess I have no comments for the sake of time, plus it's mainly because no matter what though, it's been, you know, so many years since I actually have last known about Disney Channel to begin with, so either way. By the way, that's what happens if you manage able to do not make your target score in time, because otherwise it did say time up, as opposed to, well, let's just say by the forms of out, or anything else like that, unlike the, well, the other two minigames in particular, which is of course Toad Jump and Toad Trot, that if you do screw up a minigame, it does say out, whilst in Toad Shot, that if you get time up, then obviously it did say time up, basically, because, you know, time runs out, so yeah, it's kind of unfortunate we did somehow failed on level 7 right here, because as we expected, the later stages gets really difficult, especially noticeable because, as you can tell, the actual target speed decides to increases every time when the actual timer is almost running out. So generally speaking, it's about the fact that it's all about, you know, not only timing is required, but also, more importantly, patience. So because of that though, yeah, it's only a matter of time about the fact that you have to do a ridiculous amount of tapping the screen so many times, because unlike in, you know, in Toad Trot, allows you to able to do a lot of dragging, whilst in Toad Shot, you have to specifically try to tap the bottom screen, basically. So, although, unlike in Toad Jump, on the other hand, though, we have to require to use the microphone, like I said before, which again, we'll get to more details about that if we try to sort out the actual technical problem with the actual microphone in mind, so. But yeah, for the most part, that's as far as I can try to describe about the forms of today's subject at this point. I mean, truth be told, about the fact that, like I said before, I just cannot wait until I get my hands on, you know, the Nintendo Switch 2 for the first time, and in addition to, you know, Mario Kart World, and potentially speaking of, trying out the Nintendo Switch 2 camera for the first time, just to see how the quality itself is actually going pretty good, and all that stuff. Although I don't know if it's possible about the fact that that particular camera will be compatible with, let's just say, my laptop, for instance, because as you probably already expect, ever since in 2023, specifically, by the end of that year, that you do realize about the fact that our laptop at the moment did indeed manage able to receive the USB-C connection. So, yeah, I'm very curious to check that little device out. If it does manage able to have fully compatibility with my laptop to able to improve the quality and everything, but we shall see. So either way, only 2 more levels to go for Toad Shot before we move on to the last minigame in terms of the forms of the minigames category, although it's not going to be until specifically for the later day, I'm afraid to tell you for this point, guys, just because, well, again, I need to fix the actual technical issue, as you probably can tell. But, yeah, that's as far as I can try to say about the forms of today's discussion. I mean, for the most part, though, I've already explained well enough for the sake of the forms of some other aspects in mind. Although, truth be told, though, is about the fact that a lot of viewers out there are actually still interested with Pony Kart DS for right now. Well, this is mainly because no matter what, though, not only because of Brony fandom, but in addition to the forms of likely they obviously really do enjoy Mario Kart DS before you dive into, you know, Mario Kart World, so. And gee, no wonder why about the fact that we haven't got the actual overview trailer for Mario Kart World either. Well, mind you, because no matter what though, Nintendo's gonna be in a super top secret right now, in terms of showing some more details about the forms of Mario Kart World as of now, just because, well, we have to wait and see what happens if we do somehow manage able to experience the game for ourselves, so. Yeah, I guess it makes it a little bit more obvious because it kind of reminds me like a similar vibes as the forms of back in the day in 2008 for the likes of in Super Smash Bros. Brawl or something like that. I mean, relatively speaking, that'll be a discussion for a later time. So as you can see on the final level right there, we need to require to reach for about whopping 230 points, which is insane, especially considering for the fact that we do need to be very careful of not to do a lot of tapping and stuff like that. And then as far as you do realize, the butt bombs are your best friend right there, because that way you can able to actually do the ridiculous amount of combo and able to actually destroy those Bowser targets instantly. So yeah, that's actually pretty swell. And that pretty much does it for Toad Shot. So yeah, pretty awesome. Although we only failed once, but that's okay. Because obviously though, you can retry as many times as you want. So with that being said, folks, is that we get endings of this one right here. So join me next time for some more of Let's Play of Super Princess Peach for the Nintendo DS. Is that potentially speaking of, this is going to be the true finale, basically. For not only trying to go through 10 levels in Toad's Jump, but in addition to that, finding the missing enemies in addition to a rare enemy as well, and showing off some other stuff as well. So I'll see you guys until then. Later, fellas.